We do want to get more reaction to this news today and the decision by Stellantis and what it means for workers. So joining us now is the Mayor of Brampton, Ontario, Patrick Brown. Mayor Brown, thank you for joining us.
How does that make you feel? How are they going to pay their bills? And so saying that they're going to have future talks with the Canadian government doesn't mean a lot to me. I spoke to them yesterday, obviously upset with the decision, and they said as long as tariffs are on, there's no market to produce cars in Canada. And
is trying to figure out what will happen next, and the community is saying this will be devastating to the area.
It began with a sound, sharp, final, unforgettable. The last hum of an engine fading into silence. Inside the Stellantis assembly plant in Brampton, Ontario, 1,000 workers froze mid-motion as the lights cut out. The factory that built the Jeep Compass for years, a symbol of Canadian craftsmanship and North American strength, shut down without warning. What had once been a heartbeat of industry went dark. Across the border, the mood told a different story. In Belvedere, Illinois, the cameras clicked and flags waved. Politicians lined up for photo ops. Speeches echoed across a shiny new factory floor. Jobs are coming home, they declared. Even former President Donald Trump wasted no time taking credit, calling it proof his 25% import tariffs were bringing America back. But behind the patriotic slogans, cracks were already showing. That $13 billion relocation deal was bleeding money. Those 5,000 promised jobs, shrinking fast under the weight of soaring steel and aluminum prices, delayed shipments, and U.S. electricity bills nearly 40% higher than Ontario's. Inside boardrooms, a quiet truth began spreading. Stellantis hadn't escaped tariffs. It had run straight into a financial trap. The move triggered a cost spiral. Supply chains fractured. Transport routes jammed. Nearby factories hoarded skilled labor. And tariff retaliation from Canada and Mexico added tens of millions in new import costs. Wall Street analysts noticed first. Shares slipped, supplier contracts stalled, and dealerships braced for price hikes of up to 15% by early 2026. Yet north of the border, the so-called loser was staging a comeback. Ontario didn't complain, it adjusted. Billions were poured into electric vehicle supply chains, battery mineral refining, and Nexstar's $5 billion EV battery plant. Laid-off Brampton workers were quietly hired back. European automakers, spooked by American political volatility, shifted investment to Canada, choosing stability over slogans. Economists now call it a case study, patriotism versus math. A political win for TV cameras. A disaster for balance. The letter was titled Canadian Industrial Commitment Clause, Notice of Enforcement. Just one page, calm, surgical. In it, Canada reminded Stellantis of something the headlines had ignored: the fine print. Under the 2022 Electron Volts investment agreement, every automaker receiving federal and provincial incentives was legally bound to maintain a full Canadian industrial footprint, not just assembly lines, but research, development, battery integration, and long-term supply continuity. Violating that commitment meant consequences, penalties exceeding $400 million, enforced through built-in safety valve clauses that Ottawa negotiated years earlier for moments exactly like this. No threats, no podium drama, just contract law, and it worked. Inside Stellantis headquarters, panic spread quietly. Legal teams scrambled. According to internal memos leaked to Toronto's Financial Post, executives were warned the company could lose access to future EV subsidies, clean energy tax credits, and cross-border fast-tracking under USMCA supply rules. Losing Canada wasn't just bad business, it would cripple the company's North American strategy. Ontario Premier Doug Ford put it bluntly, "Canada doesn't shout, we enforce." While Washington used tariffs to intimidate industries, Canada used structure to secure them. That difference, discipline over drama, became the turning point. Production of critical EV components remained anchored in Windsor and Oakville. Battery research stayed rooted in Kingston. Ottawa doubled down, deploying its $4.9 billion Industrial Resilience Fund, tying every dollar of government support to measurable output and job guarantees. No loyalty speeches. No political theater. Just results that global investors noticed. Money follows stability, and Canada was stable. America was unpredictable. By autumn, European automotive suppliers redirected over $1.2 billion in contracts to Canada, citing what they called policy coherence and industrial durability. While the United States roared through press conferences, Canada quietly rewrote the rules of modern industrial strategy, because power isn't always about who raises their voice. Sometimes it belongs to the one who writes the rules and controls the signatures. And as Stellantis calculated the cost of breaching a contract it thought it could ignore, one question echoed across every boardroom table. When politics end and paperwork begins, who truly holds the power? The tariffs were supposed to be simple. Tax imports, bring jobs home, trigger a manufacturing comeback. But somewhere between campaign bravado and economic reality, the math snapped in half. By mid-2025, Trump's 25% auto tariffs under Executive Order 14278 had gone from strategy to self-inflicted damage. What began as a patriotic headline had become a logistics disaster, and Stellantis was the first company to bleed. The global supply chain that powered Jeep, from aluminum in Quebec to transmissions, in Mexico to precision tools from France, collapsed under a web of stacked tariffs. Every bolt that crossed a border came with a new tax. Every delay triggered penalties. Every shipment bled money. Analysts estimated that tariff ripple effects alone added $300 million in new costs in 6 months. By July, Stellantis posted a $2.3 billion net loss, warning those losses could reach $7 billion by year's end if tariffs held. Then came the shutdowns. Plants in Michigan and Indiana went dark without warning. 900 workers sent home. Local politicians called it temporary. Economists called it inevitable, because tariffs don't just punish foreign rivals. They punish the very system they're built on. The U.S. auto industry runs on integration: Canadian aluminum, Mexican electronics, European robotics. Break one link, the whole chain snaps. Wall Street didn't wait for speeches. Shares of major automakers plunged. Stellantis, once held up as proof of America first, lost 15% of its market value in just 3 weeks. One trader on CNBC said it best: Wall Street doesn't believe in slogans. It believes in balance sheets. Across the Atlantic, suppliers began making quiet calculations. If America wanted isolation, they would give it what it asked for: distance. Contracts that once flowed through Detroit and Toledo were redirected to Germany, South Korea, and China, where trade lanes remained open and predictable. While Washington cheered for economic independence, global capital simply voted with its feet and walked. But inside the White House, the message never changed. Tariffs mean strength, officials repeated. Yet for thousands of families in Michigan staring at silent assembly lines and empty pay stubs, it didn't feel like strength. It felt like silence, the kind that follows a broken promise. Because the question now isn't whether tariffs work politically. It's whether America can still afford them economically. When the cure costs more than the disease, who's really being healed? While Washington wrestled with chaos, Ottawa rewrote the industrial playbook quietly. No panic broadcasts, no rally speeches, just strategy. When Stellantis pulled Jeep Compass production out of Brampton, Ontario, most pundits declared the city dead. Another casualty in a new trade war. But Canada flipped the script in a matter of weeks. The 2,000 workers left behind, they weren't abandoned. They were redeployed. Every one of them was transitioned into the Next Star Energy EV project, a joint venture between Stellantis and LG Energy worth $5 billion CAD in Windsor, Ontario. What looked like a factory loss became a workforce upgrade. The same assembly workers who once bolted gas engines now assembled battery modules, moving from combustion to clean tech without missing a paycheck. Windsor sparked back to life. The Stellantis plant added a third production shift, bringing back hundreds more jobs. Unifor, Canada's largest private sector union, secured a 2027 employment security deal, locking in wage stability and retraining guarantees while American unions were still picketing for healthcare coverage. The numbers told the real story. $1.22 billion. CAD reinvested into Windsor, Essex. Infrastructure, housing, and logistics expansion. Funded to support workforce inflow and employment steady at 5.6%. Despite global auto layoffs, regional tax revenue rising instead of collapsing, economists called it a masterclass in soft reindustrialization, a model closer to Germany and South Korea than the boom and bust theatrics seen in the US. Instead of weaponizing tariffs, Canada weaponized stability. Investment followed certainty. European suppliers like Bosch, Magna, and Valeo expanded in Ontario. Multi-year contracts were shifted from Illinois to Canada Global Funds from London. Tokyo and Seoul began treating Canada as North America's safe manufacturing hub for workers. It wasn't just policy, it was survival with dignity. Michael Roy, a former Brampton technician, told CTV, "We thought we lost our future. Then Canada gave us a new one." South of the border, the contrast was brutal. American towns that were promised a manufacturing revolution were now left with frozen assembly lines. Rising utility bills and no answers. Canada, without slogans or stage lights, pulled off what Washington couldn't, turning industrial loss into strategic leverage. Not luck. Not noise. Just contracts, calculus, and trust. But as Canada moved from recovery to dominance in the global EV supply chain, a question began to haunt Washington. Did America just hand its industrial future to the neighbor it tried to outsmart? The confetti has settled. The cameras are gone. And in Belvidere, Illinois, what remains is not a renaissance, but a yard full of half-finished Jeeps baking under the Midwestern sun. It was supposed to be victory. It became exposure. Inside Stellantis' new U.S. flagship plant, the truth is now impossible to hide. Production targets failed spectacularly. By late 2025, Belvidere was running at just 52% capacity. Shortages of tariff-hit European and Canadian components stalled. Assembly. Thousands of Compass units now sit incomplete, missing the exact parts tariff. Policy made too expensive to import. The damage. $3.3 billion lost in restructuring, retooling, and write-downs. The executives who once promised a factory miracle are now facing angry shareholders and panicked boardrooms. Bloomberg analysts call it policy whiplash, the cost of building a business model on politics instead of planning. And the bleeding hasn't stopped. Labor costs in Illinois, are now 30% higher than in Ontario, shredding margins quarter after quarter. Federal grants meant to offset the losses are stalled in legal disputes. Suppliers are reconsidering their contracts entirely. Workers in Belvedere fought to keep their hours, but the lines told a darker story. Shifts were cut, inventories piled up, and the promise of revival slowly dissolved into confusion. "We brought the plant back," one supervisor admitted, "but not the stability." What followed became known as the costliest comeback in modern manufacturing. America celebrated the return of factory lights. But by the time the cameras moved on, the world had already moved ahead. In Canada, in Europe, in Asia, manufacturing didn't just return. It transformed. While U.S. factories stumbled over tariffs, politics, and unpredictable policy, the global supply chain rewired itself, quietly, permanently, and with mathematical precision. In Germany, electric vehicle components were being produced 18% cheaper than in the United States. In Tokyo boardrooms and Scandinavian investment houses, a new conclusion emerged. America's reshoring boom was not an economic strategy, it was a political stunt. The Financial Times said it without hesitation: "Reshoring isn't revival, it's mispriced risk." And Belvedere paid that price. Restaurants stayed half empty. Local tax revenue fell 12% in a single quarter. School repairs were delayed. Families who believed in the dream of industrial comeback were now juggling part-time jobs and maxed-out credit cards. Because in the real world, manufacturing doesn't run on speeches, it runs on math. And when the math breaks, pride becomes very expensive. Across the border, the story shifted. Canada didn't hit headlines, it hit targets. While Washington fought tariff battles, Ottawa built something far more powerful: a predictable policy framework. No sudden bans, no overnight trade shocks, no government by chaos. Instead, planning, law, and long-term deals, and it worked. In Windsor, laid-off factory workers retrained under federally funded apprenticeships. Mechanics became battery technicians. Welders became automation specialists. Streets once lined with for lease signs now hum with new EV production. The comeback wasn't emotional, it was engineered. Foreign investment surged 11% in a single year. Panasonic, Valeo, and European funds poured billions into Ontario and Quebec. Global lenders began rating Canada's industrial credit risk lower than the U.S. for the first time in a decade. In Tokyo, Frankfurt, and Zurich, investors used a new phrase: "Canada is calm." The U.S. is chaos. That calm became currency. Jobs stabilized. Wages rose. Energy prices stayed manageable. The system didn't depend on hype or crisis. It depended on resilience. Economists gave it a name: quiet power. Because in a world full of shouting politicians, real strength no longer lives in headlines. It lives in systems that work. By late 2025, Canada's industrial output recovered faster than any G7 nation. EV exports to Europe rose 18%. Ontario unemployment held steady at 5.6%. Confidence returned. Meanwhile, the U.S. auto sector spent $3.3 billion on restructuring and still operated at half capacity. So what was the difference? It wasn't luck. It wasn't geography. It was temperament. In the 21st century, power belongs not to the loudest economy, but to the most disciplined one. The nations that win now are not the ones who shout, but the ones who prepare. Borders can stop trucks, but not innovation. Tariffs can delay shipments, but not strategy. The future belongs to countries that stay steady when others are swinging blindly. So, As the camera pulls away from silent fields in Belvedere and pans across the humming EV lines of Windsor, a lesson becomes undeniable. Stability is not weakness. Stability is strategy. And in a world spinning faster every year, the future will not belong to the loud. It will belong to the prepared.